Beer. After tea, it's the world's most popular beverage. Last year, we downed 299 million litres of the stuff. That's 206 bottles of beer for every man, woman and child in New Zealand. But how much do we really know about what goes into it? Unlike almost every other food we buy, there are no ingredients listed on the label. MAF Food Safety tells us that beer is a traditional food and its ingredients are common knowledge, so there's no need to label them. Well, they might be common, but I have to confess, I don't know what they are.
I don't think you can assume that people know what's in their beer, and I don't think you can assume that what people think is in their beer is necessarily what's in there all the time.
Unlike local brews, some imported beers do have ingredient labels. They reveal the use of colours, preservatives and stabilisers, hardly commonly known and traditional ingredients. I'm also going to find out about chemical additives. Do our brewers use them too, and are any of them harmful? But first, what are the traditional ingredients of beer? Turns out they're set out in a very old German law.
Essentially, a Bavarian nobleman decreed that beer could only be made out of malted barley, hops and water.
Malted barley is a roasted grain that forms the basis of beer. It gives it its sweet, malty flavour and darker roasts add colour. Hops are the spice that flavours beer and gives it its bitter taste. They're the buds of a vine whose nearest living relative is cannabis. They're supposed to make you sleepy, but that's where the similarity ends. But how do two such simple ingredients become beer? I'm on my way to visit a craft brewer who brews the same basic way people have for centuries. The process starts by extracting sugar from the malted barley.
It looks like porridge, but what we've taken is malted barley and we put it in here with hot water. This is where we get our sugars from for the yeast to eat and convert into alcohol.
The liquid that drains off is the basis of beer.
So, should we give it a try? Yeah. Okay. Wow, that is so sweet, isn't it? It's lovely though, and quite pleasant hot, isn't it? It's actually a lovely drink just like that.
The sweet liquid is then boiled in a giant kettle. This is when the hops are added, infusing the liquid with bitterness and flavour. This is very glamorous work. It's hot, it's sweaty, we've got the man gloves. This is the next step in my brewing apprenticeship. Luke uses truckloads of hops because he loves the flavour.
Here we go. Wow, that is so hot. I can feel that right through my gloves.
There you go, all in.
We've got them all. Woo!
Looking good.
Oh, hot.
Epic is one of around 60 craft breweries in New Zealand, many of whose beers are available in supermarkets. It's a far cry from the bad old days.
There were one or two varieties. Oh, of course, they had Lion. And they had DB. Ladies used to drink DB because it's a lighter beer, and stout.
Luke's signature brew is a pale ale, and after 5 weeks in the fermenter, it's almost ready to bottle. And that's that. With nothing else added, it's amazingly flavoursome.
Wow.
What are you getting in that?
Ooh, pressure's on.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Passion fruit?
Yeah.
And maybe something like a mango or a
So you
pineapple.
could probably say subtropical notes.
Yeah. Bottoms up.
Sometimes brewers do add additional flavours to beer. Rimu, rata honey and even tamarillo are just some of the Kiwi touches that have been thrown in.
One of the beers that won a gold medal at the recent Brew New Zealand Beer Awards was flavoured with pineapple lumps.
But no matter how you dress it up, beer's bitterness remains an acquired taste, and far more men seem to acquire it than women. But why? Does it have something to do with women being super tasters? Super tasters are people with more taste buds than the rest of us, making them more sensitive to bitter tastes. Only about 15% of men are super tasters, compared to a whopping 35% of women.
So are women who don't like beer more likely to be super tasters? We've planned a wee experiment to find out.
at Lone Star are used to serving up beer, but do they like the taste of it? We're serving our servers 3 beers with increasing amounts of hoppy bitterness. If they like them all, they're probably low tasters. If they don't like any, they could be super tasters. And if they like 1 or 2, we're calling them average tasters.
I like that one. Tastes a bit like water.
Water.
I like it. It's not so sweet, but it's nice and light.
Yuck.
Yuck. On to beer number 2, a top-selling, mildly bitter classic New Zealand draft.
It was yuck.
What about it was yuck?
Really bitter.
Disgusting.
Why?
It was bitter.
Time to step things up a notch with a bitter, hop-fueled monster.
I don't like that one.
You don't like it?
It tastes a little bit like cigarette.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's nice. It was horrendous. It was very, very, very bitter. Like nothing nice about it.
All but one of the girls liked the least bitter of our beers. Number 2 polarised our testers, but more liked it than not. But only about a third enjoyed the really hoppy brew. After the break, we find out if these girls are super tasters, if Steinlager causes headaches, and if canned beer damages the family jewels.
They'll have feminising effects. The sperm count goes down.
I've seen beer as a cottage industry, but what most of us drink is mass-produced beer. DB and Lion Nathan make nearly 90% of all the beer we drink.
Rumours abound about chemical additives in big brand beer, and the beer that seems to attract the lion's share of attention is Steinlager.
The Steinlager headache is probably the most common question that I get asked when I run beer tastings. I know that it is officially denied, but I certainly do fall victim to the Steinlager headache after a couple of beers.
Lion Nathan tells us that Steinlager headache is an urban myth that came about because it was one of our first 5% lagers, but consumers drank it like they did the existing 4% lagers and therefore consumed more alcohol than they normally would have. Unofficially, beer drinkers have blamed everything from Steinlager's green bullet hop to sulfites, additives and preservatives.
While Lion doesn't want to talk about Steinlager headache, they are more than happy to show me how they make beer. And I'm interested to find out which additives they do use.
This brand new brewery can churn out 40,000 6-packs per batch, and it can do that 8 times a day.
So obviously this is a pretty big operation.
The biggest in New Zealand.
How does this differ from a small brewery, the way they do it?
Well, the process is exactly the same. What we have here is state-of-the-art equipment with a lot of inline monitoring, so we can produce a very consistent product.
But the question is, are they achieving that consistency with a lot of chemical additives? The Chinese are rumoured to add formaldehyde to their beer.
The official newspaper of China actually printed a story saying that that practice had ended, tacitly admitting that it had occurred.
And in the 1960s, some brewers added small amounts of the heavy metal cobalt to their beer to give it longer lasting head. 50 beer drinkers in Canada and the US died as a result. With a track record like that, it's no wonder many people are suspicious of additives in beer. So, what additives go into our beer?
There is a very restricted list of approved additives in beer. And almost half of them are types of caramel.
Caramel is essentially burned sugar, and it's in lots of commercial beer. It's used to touch up the colour, which would otherwise vary slightly from batch to batch. But what about preservatives? People who say they get Steinlager headache often blame preservatives, and they say Steinlager Pure, which is advertised as preservative-free, doesn't give them a headache. So is that the difference?
In our beers, we don't use any preservatives. There's no need to use preservatives.
According to the industry, no commercial New Zealand beers have preservatives, whether they are pure or not. Pure beer is pure marketing. Beer is preserved by boiling, alcohol and hops, and pasteurising it in the bottle. So much for that theory, but what about sulfites?
They're an antioxidant. They basically will they'll capture the oxygen and stop the degradation of flavour. And they keep beer fresh for longer.
We found them in imported beer, but are they used here?
Consumers don't like the idea of sulfites, so we've made the decision to take them out.
Modern breweries are better at keeping oxygen out of beer in the first place, so Lion says they can do without sulfites. They do admit adding a chemical to their fermentation tanks, something called antifoam.
So during a fermentation, they'll generate a lot of foam, and once it's been generated on top of the fermenter, it'll be lost and it won't appear in the consumer's glass.
Antifoam is a silicone that floats on top of the fermenter, keeping the froth down.
Okay, so silicone, that kind of sounds scary. It conjures up all kinds of awful images. Is that an easy thing for you to remove from the product?
Absolutely. If you think of it as almost as an oil-like substance, and it's removed during the filtration process, so there's absolutely none of it goes through to the product, because if it did, you'd have no foam on your beer.
For the record, DB tells us it doesn't use antifoam. So far, commercial beer isn't looking too scary, but many of the girls at Lone Star just don't like the taste of it.
You're irresistible.
Is that because they're super tasters? Women are far more likely to be super tasters than men, which could explain why fewer of them seem to like beer. We're going to reveal their taste buds with blue food colouring. Low tasters generally have less than 15 taste buds per square centimetre. Super tasters tend to have more than 35. Most of us fall somewhere in between. But when we analysed the pictures and the results of our experiment, we only found one clear-cut super taster. So the results are in, and it's as suspected. Ashley, you are our super taster, which basically means you've got heaps of taste buds. The majority of this group, 8 of us, fall into the group of being average, and 5 of us, including me, are low tasters. We've got the least amount of taste buds, but all that really means is that we're not fussy. We will eat and drink just about anything. But even low tasters might balk at beer that's been skunked. Skunking happens when beer is exposed to light. Light causes the hops in the beer to give off an incredibly potent odour, very similar to that of a skunk. Clear glass looks sexy, but it provides no protection from light. Green glass gives a little protection, but brown is by far the best. So how can beer survive in clear glass? One way is to treat the hops with chemicals.
So the hop bitterness is extracted, and then it is treated so that it is no longer sensitive to light. And now we use it in beer that we're going to put into clear glass, like Lion Ice, and that then doesn't get affected by light.
It's not natural, but there are no health concerns with these hop extracts. Cans cut out all light, so they're best for beer. But is it true that they can make your brew taste metallic? If you dissolve the metal, you'll find a protective plastic lining. The beer inside the can is never in contact with the metal. So, unless you put your lips directly on the can, it's fiction. But is there a downside to plastic liners? A component of liners called bisphenol A, BPA for short, may leach into the beer. Canadian health authorities have detected it in canned beer, but not the identical brands in bottles. The concern is that BPA can mimic the female hormone estrogen.
So it's a concern to men more than women in this context. And one of the effects that might occur if you're exposed to high enough levels of BPA is that the sperm count would decrease and fertility will go down.
But can drinking beer from a can really affect your sperm count?
There have been a couple of studies actually carried out around the world looking at how much beer you'd need to drink to get an effect on you. You'd need to drink a very great deal of beer.
That much beer might affect a bloke's performance, but not because of the BPA. MAF Food Safety is not concerned about BPA. The Canadian authorities have declared it toxic, but even they stress the BPA exposure from beer is very low and poses no health concerns. No matter what kind of beer you like, everyone agrees you should drink it as fresh as possible. Beer, unlike wine, does not improve with age.
The saying goes, beer is best drunk in the shadow of the brewery.
Local beer is usually pretty fresh, but imported beer can take a long time to reach us in unrefrigerated shipping containers.
There's always a risk that it's been left sitting on the port somewhere, or it's been jostled too much, or it's been sitting around too long. And you need to recognise that beer will never taste, in a bottle in New Zealand, will never taste as good and as fresh as it did in the brewery in Britain or America.
Contrary to popular opinion, locally brewed Guinness or Heineken will probably taste better than the original. After the break, are the beers on our shelves really what they claim to be?
It is difficult seeing a lager being labelled as something that it's not.
And can blokes even tell one beer from another?
I think they're all starting to taste the same, to be honest.
Beer is one of the most heavily marketed products around.
Too much on the line, mate. You're on.
Last year, the two big brewers spent around $8 million each on advertising their brews. Let's face it, with clever ads, they can sell us pretty much anything, as long as it's cold and fizzy. Which got us wondering, take away all the branding?
Gorgeous beer.
Can we even tell them apart? The guys at Onehunga Panel and Paint are experienced drinkers, always up for a beer at the end of a hard week. We've given them 4 commonly available New Zealand drafts. Black plastic cups mask slight differences in colour. All they have to go on is their taste buds.
Number 1's alright, number 2's...
Number 2's horrible. Well, I think number 1 is definitely Speight's.
It hasn't got a lot of flavour, and what it has got isn't very nice.
I think number 2 is probably Ranfilly Draft.
I think they're all starting to taste the same, to be honest.
Okay, so most of the guys are struggling,
Number 2
but Vaughan's
is
misspent
probably
youth
Ranfilly
stands
Draft.
him in good stead.
Number 3, just conferring with my taste buds.
Take your time.
I think that's Tui.
Really?
Maybe Tui.
What's that, number 4? It could be either Speight's or Tui.
Out of 10 experienced drinkers, most could only identify 1 or 2.
Gentlemen, the results are in. The person that got all of them right, put your hands together for your co-worker, Vaughan. Okay, so put your hands together in a sort of supportive sort of way for your co-worker who got them all wrong, and that is Cliff.
In similar experiments done in the US, even the most die-hard brand-loyal drinkers couldn't pick their brand out of a lineup. That's the power of marketing. Critics say 2 of the beers in our test aren't even what they claim to be, ales.
Fundamentally, there are 2 types of beer, lagers and ales. Ale is the more traditional form, and essentially that's where the yeast works at a warmer temperature, and it tends to produce sort of more rounded, fruity beers. Lagers are a much more modern invention, work at much colder temperatures, and you end up with crisper and cleaner tasting beers.
Of the 180 billion litres of beer drunk around the world each year, the overwhelming majority is lager. Even much of the stuff that claims to be ale is actually made with a lager yeast.
Tui Pale Ale probably was a sparkling ale or a pale ale. Over time, a lot of breweries switched to lager production, so Tui is now a New Zealand brown lager essentially.
Tui? A pale ale? Yeah, right. Well, the big brewers say that with modern technology it is possible to make both ale and lager styles with the same yeast strain.
And what about the latest beer craze to hit our shelves, low carbohydrate beers? Do they live up to the hype? We asked nutritionist Claire Turnbull for her verdict.
So the average person needs around 250 grams of carbohydrate a day. A standard beer is only up to 15 grams of carbohydrate, which is pretty much half an apple or a couple of radishes. It's really not that high in carbohydrate. So a low carbohydrate beer, it's a bit of a myth.
If you compare low alcohol and low carb beers, there's no doubt that the biggest reduction in kilojoules comes from reducing the alcohol content, not carbs. Fact or fiction, beer will give you a beer gut. That's fiction. Excess fat simply comes from excess kilojoules. It just so happens that men are inclined to store fat on their bellies. A recent government report recommends beer kilojoules should actually be labelled clearly on the bottle. So what are the effects of the one ingredient that is labelled in beer?
Well, initially you might feel good, the usual enabling effect of alcohol, but those effects will go away, and that's called tolerance. You become tolerant to the effects of alcohol, and that occurs quite quickly, within half an hour.
So drinking more won't make you feel better, but now alcohol's other effects start to kick in.
You become uncoordinated, unbalanced, and eventually, if you drink enough, wait long enough, you'll become comatose.
Excess alcohol can damage your heart and your liver and even cause cancer. But there's a persistent rumour out there that there's at least one thing about beer that's pretty healthy. Is stout really a good source of iron?
Generations of pregnant and nursing women have sworn by it. Let's be clear, the Ministry of Health does not recommend drinking during pregnancy, but the belief in stout is still so widespread, we sent 8 dark beers to the lab. None contained detectable amounts of iron. This one really is an old midwife's tale.
Many women also believe that a little tipple helps breastfeeding babies get off to sleep.
I don't deny that experience, but I think the explanation is that the mother becomes more relaxed and the baby senses the mother is relaxed, and an irritable baby can then fall asleep.
But is it dangerous for the baby if its mother has an occasional beer while breastfeeding?
There's absolutely no evidence for that. The alcohol in the blood gets into the milk. In fact, it's about the same concentration as it is in the blood. But alcohol in blood is very, very, very weak beer. The typical dilution is about 40-fold.
Nevertheless, health officials err on the side of caution and recommend breastfeeding women abstain completely. So, what's really in our beer?
Well, what ends up in the bottle is mostly water, alcohol and delicious flavour. I wish there was more information on the bottle, and I'll be taking those low-carb claims with a lot of salt. I'm happy to find the big brewers have been taking additives out of their beer and that no beer contains preservatives. But unfortunately, that elusive Steinlager headache remains a mystery. Cheers.